at everything that I've learned over the last 2 years, over the last 10 years, everything that we've done with the Business Agility Institute over the last 2. And if you hang around to the end, I'm going to share some discount codes for the Sparking Business Agility Conference, which is happening in Bangalore next month. So a little bit of a reward for people who hang around till the very end. So if you just bear with me for 30 seconds, I'm just going to very quickly share my screen. There we go. Done. So the topic of the session is what we call certain uncertainty. And the reason it's called that is very simple, because uncertainty is the only thing that is certain. That and the death and taxes, which is the old joke. So if uncertainty is the only thing that you can rely on, if that's the only thing that you can trust, how can you build a business? How can you run a business? How can you predict what the market is going to do? Well, you build a resilience business. You build an organization, a business that is able to adapt quickly, one that is able to identify opportunities in the market, and one that is able to take advantage of those opportunities. And for that, you need a lot of things. But first, I'm going to ask you a question. And I want you to go into the chat. And I'm going to open up the chat here. And I want you to type in, what have you actually done that has accelerated your business agility journey right now in your organization? Now, the answer might be nothing. You may have adopted agile, which is great. You may have started to adopt and make changes to the way that you do HR, or maybe you've changed the way you're building products. Maybe you've adopted lean startup, right? Give us some ideas. Let us hear what you're doing right now. There we go. So upskilled yourself. Excellent. That's number one. We talk about a growth mindset, and that's a key domain of business agility. So I'm happy with that. Sridhar changed the way that you train people. Robert, group implemented Kanban. This is fantastic. So all of these are good. Oh, hang on, there we go. I've introduced Scrum as Scrum Master in my company. Yes. Understanding the gray areas. I like that one. And Fayazdan, I think you and I are going to have a conversation a little bit more about that. Implementing agile values. Yes. And we'll talk about where the mindset and culture of agility and agile comes into play. Safe implementation, absolutely. So when we're talking about ways of working, there is a place for agile frameworks. But what you're about to see is it's not enough. And we'll go a bit deeper as to why that is the case. So I'll talk about the conference in a bit. Before we go into what is business agility, I want to quickly bring your attention to the Business Agility Report. So about a year ago, we started collecting data for the second Business Agility Report. This was looking at hundreds of companies around the world and how they were adopting business agility. In 12 months, we collected information from consulting companies, aerospace companies, retail companies, banking, IT. We had respondents who were CEOs of companies, and we had respondents who were individual coaches. We had respondents coming from companies of 150,000 or 200,000 or 300,000, and companies of 5. And we were looking, and we had companies in India, in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia, in Australia, in New Zealand, and in America and Europe and all over the world. And you know what we found? We found that business agility is very poorly understood, right? We found that organizations around the world, right, don't get what it means to be an agile organization. Some do, don't get me wrong. Overall business agility maturity is actually quite low, but it's not great. It really isn't. So I'm going to take the next 20 minutes. I'm not going to change the slides. I'm just going to focus on this one, because this is the most important slide that I've got, because this is what we call the domains of business agility. These are, I call this the don't forget model, because this is, if you're going to transform an organization, what you need to remember. If you forget any one of these, your transformation is going to be fundamentally limited. And we see around the world diminishing returns, companies spending millions of dollars, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars on organizational agile transformations, and they don't see a return on their investment. And that's sad, because it's actually a really powerful thing. But what they're doing is they're spending money in the same place over and over and over again, but they're not looking at the entire organization as a system, as an ecosystem. So these domains are meant to be the don't forget model. What do you need to focus in on? So bear with me for about 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to talk you through these. I'm going to talk you through why these are important, how these are important, and where these are important. At the very center of the model, we have our customer. Now, our customer is important for one very, very important reason. The customer is why we are in business. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to some of you, but you're not in business to make money. You need to make money to stay in business, but it's not your purpose. There's a great quote by Frederick Laloux. Profit is like the air. We do not live to breathe, but we do need to breathe in order to live. And that is true of your company. You need to make profit, you need to make money, but that is not your purpose. Your purpose is to serve the customer, hence why the customer is at the center. If that center is the why, then the surrounding three domains are the who. Your partners, your board, and your workforce. These are the three entities, the three people, or the types of people who you need in your organization to be agile. Workforce is the obvious one, right? That is everyone who works in your company, everyone who's creating value, whether they are an employee or a contractor, it doesn't really matter. They are creating value for the customer. And they need to have agility in their heart. They need to have everything that these surrounding domains talk about, which I'll come to. But we do spend time talking about our workforce, and agile HR is a good example. We spend a lot of time talking about agile HR. How do you recruit for culture? How do you create employee engagement or increase employee engagement? How do you change incentive schemes? And we have research on all of these topics, which tell us the workforce needs to be agile. But we forget our partners and we forget the board. So who are our partners? Our partners are the broader ecosystem. So think about the kind of people who work with your organization who are not part of your organization. Your vendors, your suppliers, your distributors, right? Your broader supply chain. Now, if you're a technology company, which I suspect many of you are, then these could be vendors, other technology organizations, but they could be on-sellers or resellers of products that you're using. Maybe you are somebody else's partner. And think of it in terms of flow, right? We mentioned Kanban very early on in the first question. Kanban is all about getting a steady, stable, consistent flow, predictable flow of work. So think about this in terms of agility, right? If you're delivering, let's say you've got DevOps, you're a tech company, you're able to deliver change every, what's Amazon's statistic, every 11.3 seconds. That's great, except if your partner, if your vendor is unable to deploy, to do work that quickly, or your distributor is unable to sell work that quickly, it doesn't matter how fast you are, it doesn't matter how agile you are fundamentally constrained by those other partners in that ecosystem. You as a company are not a standalone entity. You are part of a network of multiple companies who feed into you and you feed into. And so agility has to flow. It's not you're agile and nobody else is. Then on the other side, we've got the board. Now, the board represent the shareholders. The board is the ultimate representation of the ownership of the company. Now, we've seen time and time again companies who have taken these agile transformations, but have forgotten the board. They've forgotten what it takes to transform the very people who own the company, because it's hard. And I'll be honest, transforming the board is one of the hardest things that you can do. But if you don't transform them, if they're not part of your journey, you will ultimately maybe not fail, but maybe you will. I've seen at least 3 organizations in the last couple of years completely fail because the board has made a decision that has gone against the agile transformation, that has gone against agility. They've lost staff, they've lost market share, all because the board made a decision. And if they do not understand or respect agility, then I'm afraid this whole thing is not going to work particularly well. Around the outside, so if customers the why and partners, board, and workforce is the who, then around the outside, we have the what. This is what you need to do. Now, we've broken this into 3 dimensions: leadership, individuals, and operations. Leadership starts with people management, and people management is fundamentally important. Even in self-managed organizations, we still have managers, because in a self-managed organization, it's not no managers, it's that everybody is a manager. People management in an agile organization, we need someone who cares about your career. We need someone to remove impediments. We need someone to communicate organizational vision. These are all skills that need to be developed and nurtured inside the organization. And if those are poorly done, if you have managers who instruct and say, you shall do this, rather than managers who who delegate and inspire autonomy in their teams, then you're not going to get very far. It doesn't matter how much you apply SAFe or Scrum or Kanban. If you don't have leaders and managers who know how to delegate, you won't get very far at all. The second domain there is one team. Now, this doesn't mean literally one team. This is a metaphor. This means unity, common purpose, that sense of one team across your organization. And that's fundamentally important, because the larger the company, you might have thousands of employees, but unless they're all pointing in the same direction, then I'm afraid you're not going to get very far once again. Strategic agility. Now, this one's important. This one's fun. This one's one of my favorites, right? There's a term that Steve Denning uses in some of his Forbes articles: emergent strategy. And this is the key here. You don't need to know what your company strategy is going to be in 5 years' time. You don't need a strategic roadmap for 10 years. You need to have the ability to adapt your strategy on the fly, to adapt your strategy month by month, quarter by quarter, depending on what the market is doing. If there is a new opportunity, a new way of pivoting your organization, or pivoting a product, or pivoting a business unit to achieve a result in a better way, then you need to be in a position to do so, and do so as quickly as you can. Right? And that's the concept of that emergent strategy. Your strategy emerges based on everything that happens around it, based on the interplay of your organization with your competitors in the marketplace. And with all of those moving pieces, your strategy is emergent. That's the key word. Individuals. Individuals, the 3 domains under individuals relate to you as a person. And in fact, everyone in your organization as individual people. Number 1, they need a growth mindset. And we spoke about that at the very beginning as well. Growth mindset is one of the key domains of business agility, because it relates very fundamentally to how your organization learns and how your organization is able to adapt. Experimentation, learning, right? Safe to fail. These are all concepts that come into that growth mindset concept. And I was literally reading an article this morning about layoffs across India at the moment. Big consulting firms laying off thousands of employees, not because the market is weak, but because these are employees who are unable to adapt to the new skills needed by their clients. Now, this is sad for these people because it shows that these firms haven't invested in developing a growth mindset in some of their consultants. So I don't see that as a failure of the person, but rather as a failure of the system not to develop those growth mindsets. But you as individuals, you need to be able to develop that growth mindset and develop that sense of experimentation and that sense of the skills and the capabilities you have today are not the same skills and capabilities that you need tomorrow. So you've got to be ready and able to change. The second domain there is ownership and accountability. Now, this is two sides of the same concept. Right? Ownership. I need to take ownership for my work. I do something, I do it well, I own it. Accountability is the opposite side of that, where I will be held to account for what I own. If I make a mistake, it is my mistake. If I touch something, even when I hand it to somebody else, I still retain accountability for what I touched. So it is my duty, my obligation, my honor to go and make sure that what I've done is of good quality. It meets the customer's need, because remember, customers at the center, right? And even once it's out of my hands, I don't let it completely go. I still want to make sure it's as good as it can possibly be, without, of course, being a perfectionist. You can take all of these too far. The third domain is craft excellence. Now, craft excellence is interesting because that really focuses in on the quality of what you create. Now, this is actually technically version 3 of the domains. In version 2 of the domains, we called craft excellence technical agility. But too many people thought that meant technology. And don't get me wrong, technology is important. You want to have key technological elements like DevOps or extreme programming or continuous delivery or continuous integration. That is a part of craft excellence. But let's say you're in HR or you're in finance or you're in marketing or operations or sales. You too need craft excellence. You too need adaptable work. You need to be able to increment and adapt the work that you do based on changing demands. You need high quality. You need systems in place to ensure quality and fit for purpose of everything that you do. So craft excellence is not just for the technologists amongst us, but it is for everybody in that organization. And it is your responsibility to help the rest of your organization develop that craft excellence. The final 3 domains are what we call the operations domains. And I leave these for last, mostly because they're the easiest ones, right? Process agility, right there in the center. You're all doing it right now. I guarantee it. Any one of you who uses the word agile or scrum or kanban or safe, you're doing process agility. You have a process, the software development process, the marketing process, the budgeting process, and you have applied agile or agility to that process. Great. We've been doing it for years. And this is why companies are having problems, because where are you spending all your money right now? In your company, I guarantee you're spending most of your money on process agility. And this is the challenge because you're forgetting everything else that's on this board. As well as process agility, we have enterprise agility. And this is important because you need to think, a process does not exist in isolation, right? You have your software development process. Fantastic. You're using Scrum. Brilliant, right? But the budgeting process feeds into that. The sales process comes out of that. The recruitment process comes into it. There are 1,000 different processes in your organization that constantly twine and intertwine and create a network of interrelated processes, practices, teams. And enterprise agility is about unraveling that so you have simplicity, so that you have agility across not just a single process, but every process, all the interlinks have agility amongst it. And that is very hard to do, but very important to do. There's a concept I talk about a lot called the theory of constraints. Now, many of you have probably heard of this. Theory of constraints comes from Eli Goldratt in a book called The Goal. And if you haven't read The Goal, I strongly recommend it. It's coming from the lean schools. The theory of constraints comes in terms of like a production line. If you're building a car on a production line, somewhere in that process is the slowest part. Now, let's say, for example, it's attaching the doors. It doesn't matter how much money you invest in speeding up the people who build the engines. If that's not the slowest part of that production line, you will only produce cars as quickly as you can attach the doors. So you spend your money on fixing the doors. Great. Theory of constraints goes one step further and says there is always a constraint. And so once you've sped up the doors, that's no longer the limiting factor. There's another one. Maybe now it is the engine. And so what we need to do is we now need to focus on the engine. And then that stops becoming the constraint and something else becomes the constraint. Maybe it's the wheels. It doesn't really matter. Right? But there's always a constraint. Something's always going to slow that system down. Let's think of it, and we'll apologize to Eli Goldratt, Evans' theory of agile constraints. An organization is only as agile as its least agile part. Think of all those intertwining processes. You've got agile in your software development lifecycle. You can deploy, you're using Scrum. You can deploy every 2 weeks, every sprint. Right? Maybe you've got DevOps. You can deploy every 11 seconds, which is fantastic. But it takes you 3 months to recruit someone. It takes you 18 months to get a budget approved. You're not 11 seconds agile, you're 18 months agile. Right? So enterprise agility is looking at all of those interplays of all those processes, and it's your job to figure out where is the constraint and where do you focus. Think about all those agile coaches you have in your organization. Are they deployed in the area that is constraining agility? And I will almost guarantee you the answer is no. I'm going to guess that most of your agile coaches are focused in technology. Right? But technology is not the constraint to agile or agility anymore. It's HR, or it's finance, or it's marketing, or it's sales, or it's the PMO, or it's compliance. There is some business function that is limiting your ability to adapt to the market, limiting your ability to meet the customer's needs, and limiting your ability to go faster. Find that part and focus your transformational effort on that part. Lastly, we have structural agility. Structural agility is getting quite popular now. Right? Everyone loves a good restructure. And we talk about Spotify models or teal organizations or cross-functional teams. Structural agility's been spoken about for decades. But beyond the consulting sales pitch, there is actually some very key research, some key evidence that says your structure is key. I wrote a book called No Projects, and there are frameworks called like no estimates. I want you to think of an agile organization as no handoffs. You want to reduce the number of times a piece of work, the creation of value, is handed off from person A to person B to person C. The faster you can hand off, or in fact, the fewer handoffs that you can have, the better you can create value for your customer. So an agile organizational structure is one that is designed to reduce the number of handoffs and create and contain ownership of a piece of work to as small a unit as possible, which is why we've been talking about cross-functional teams for decades now. But this is now true, not just at a technology level, but at a business level. We have organizations creating teams around customer experiences, where you will have finance people in the same team as developers, because that's necessary to achieve a particular customer experience. This is what a cross-functional team looks like in the 21st century. I'm going to pause here for a second. Just take a breath. I want you to think about everything I've just said. I want you to think about your organization. I want you to think about how your organization is taking on an agile transformation. I want you to think about where you're spending your time and your money and your effort. And I want you to think if you're spending it in the right place. Now, this isn't a simple matter of applying SAFe to every other part of the organization. Finance won't use SAFe, but finance does need agility. They may not need agile, but they do need agility. And everyone on this webinar, everyone listening to this video, I'm hoping has an agile mindset, has that mindset of adaptable, of emergence, of responsiveness to market and responsiveness to the customer, of service, of ownership, of autonomy. These are the characteristics of an agile mindset. And it's up to you to help the rest of your organization start to take on those characteristics and start to share them with, well, everybody. That's your job. So let me talk a little bit about what's happening around the rest of the world now. This were the results of the Business Agility Report. So as I said earlier, we interviewed hundreds of companies, or more accurately, hundreds of companies submitted to our survey. They shared their insights as to where they were, what challenges that they were facing. Now, one thing to make very clear, like for those of you who understand Net Promoter Score or NPS, you know that like 8 and 9, 9 and 10 is good, 7 and 8 is okay, and anything below 7 is a detractor, right? This is true in this scale as well. 7 and above is good and what we would consider to be an agile organization. Anything below 7, nothing wrong with that. It's just not an agile organization. Globally, the average business agility around the world is 4.4. Right? Now that's not great, but that's okay. Right? Companies around the world are getting started with this. Don't get me wrong. There are companies at the far extreme. There are companies who are amazing. And we have hundreds of case studies in our library right now of companies who are doing amazing things. And the library is free to use. Any of you are welcome to access our library whenever you want. Okay? But most companies on the whole, pretty average. Before this call, I went and I dived into the data and I looked at those Indian companies. India runs at about 4.2. Now, statistically, that's close enough that it really doesn't make a difference. So India is about on average with the rest of the world. You've got, however, what you do have is a lower standard deviation, which means you have fewer really great companies and fewer really bad companies, at least in the ones who responded to our survey. I thought that was interesting. I just wanted to share that with you. When we look at what is happening around the world, you can see Asia, and we're grouping India and the subcontinent in the broader Asia setting, sitting at about 4.5, with 4.4 being the average. Now, here is what I thought was the most powerful insights that we drew in this report. We found that in the data, in both the 2018 survey and the 2019 survey, that there were 3 key predictive indicators of business agility. Now, what does this mean? A predictive indicator is if you have these, then you are likely to have everything else as well. Funding models, value streams, and relentless improvement. If you have, as an organization, focused on changing how you fund work, to have adaptive funding models, whether you're using something like beyond budgeting or rolling budgets, any of the standard accounting practices that support adaptive and dynamic funding, then you have a much higher business agility than companies who start in software. Right? Sorry to say it, I started in software, but the biggest impact that you can have is actually in finance. Second, value streams. The companies who align work to the customer view of value have greater agility across every other domain than those who don't. What does that mean? Think of it in terms of how many handoffs do you have? If your organization is structuring its processes based on how you want to work versus how your customer wants you to work, then you have a misalignment. And there's a great case study coming out of Singapore, one of the banks there, where they were trying to improve the lost credit card process, which is a good process. They tried to make it faster. They tried to make it more adaptive. But the problem is customers don't lose a credit card. Customers lose a wallet. And in that wallet is a credit card, a debit card, and 2 or 3 other things from that bank. Think about that. If you have a process that will replace your credit card, but your customer says, I want you to replace everything because I lost my wallet, there's a disconnect in that value stream. So companies who build work processes around the customer value stream are the ones who are more successful. And lastly, we have relentless improvement. And this is directly within growth mindset. This is directly within what it means to be an agile person. All right. In an organization, you want constant improvement that focus on what can we do better. Again, companies who focus and fund, invest in relentless improvement are not only more agile, they have better business results than those who do not. So think about your organizational KPIs. Nothing here says we need to make more money. Everything here says if we're going to improve how we work, if we're going to work to how our customer wants us, and if we're going to speed up the way that we can actually fund and get work started, then we'll make more money. So I'm going to guarantee your organizational KPIs are focusing on the wrong things when it should be focusing on these 3. But don't just take it from me. Right? When we talk about business agility, there are key benefits. These are the ones that were reported from companies. Leading companies found, number 1, they made more money. Right? This isn't we're not doing agile because agile is fun. We're not doing business agility because it's a buzzword. We're doing it because ultimately we want to be a successful business. And business agility gives us more money. Who doesn't want that? Number 2, faster turnaround times. I think everyone here is familiar with agile. I don't think that's a surprise. Improved relationships. Now, there's actually 2 sides to this. Companies adopting business agility saw improved relationships with both employees and improved relationships with customers. Now, this goes beyond satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is good, but a customer relationship is better. All right? And we can prove that you are going to get greater relationships with your customers and with your employees through business agility. Lastly, greater transparency. Again, most of you are familiar with agile. I think this goes without saying that yes, an agile organization is more transparent. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone here. These were some of the key benefits that were raised through the report. I won't go into them as detail. You can read them as well as I can. And it pretty much just repeats what we were talking about in the previous slide. I love this. This was some of the quotes that we had coming out of the report this year. I think one of my favorite was our early delivery to market was effective to be the market leader. We have more engaged employees, and early signs of nurturing a growth mindset is some individuals and teams. Right? Our revenue is increasing. I mean, you can't get much more direct than that. What's going on here? There we go. Domains. Now, I spoke about all of those domains and spoke about the report. Now I'm going to link them together. What you find is that some of the domains are, there is greater agility in those than others. For example, customer. In general, companies do better with their relationship with the customer than they do, for example, with their relationship with their partners. Right? And you can see there's almost a 1 point difference between them. If I'm going to find this one. So if I actually look a little bit deeper into the customer journey, we'll see that not only is customer higher than everyone else, it also has a smaller standard deviation. So it doesn't matter whether you've been on a business agility journey for 1 year or 8 years, right? How agile you are with your customer doesn't change that much. So think of the customer as an easy way to win. Not only is it gives you a lot of movement, it is also something that you can do pretty quickly. Whereas something like structural agility or growth mindset, these take many years to get right. All right, so you can see there's a 3 point difference in structural agility and a 3.2 point difference in growth mindset between companies just getting started and companies who've been doing it for almost a decade. So you can see that there's a lot of, some of these take, well, a lot of time. If we look at this a little bit deeper, we can see that there is a fairly standard upwards trend. Companies who have been on the business agility journey for 8 years are more agile than companies who've been on the business agility journey for 1 year. I don't think that's a surprise for anyone, but the great news is I've got the data and I can tell you just how much more agile they are. The other thing which I found interesting was we looked at different industries. Now, please note this is self-assessed for the most part. We did go and we did baseline some of the data so that we could sort of draw accurate correlations between industries. But what we did find is that consulting companies tend to have greater agility than other companies. Now, we would actually sort of draw that down to the fact that consulting companies want to be market leaders. So they're going to try things on themselves before they'll try it on their clients. So that's one of the reasons why we think consulting is a little bit more advanced than the rest of, than other industries. One thing that has changed is banking. Last year, banking was the #2 industry. This year, however, retail is the #2 industry. Now, partly, I think that's we had more retail respondents this year, but we're also seeing more retail companies invest a lot of time, effort, and money in their business agility transformations, whereas a lot of the banks are now actually starting to pull back a little bit. They've invested a lot of money and they've reached a plateau, right? And because going back to the domains, where are we? There we go. Right? They've invested a lot of money. They've reached a certain maturity, but they're not sort of redeploying to somewhere else. They're not looking at, oh, we need to now invest in strategic agility, or we need to invest in ownership and accountability. And they're not getting off that plateau, which is why I think banking has gone down a little bit versus retail, which is now starting their investment. So they're on a steady stream up. I think is particularly interesting. So let me talk about the challenges. And yeah, I've got about 5 minutes left. When we ask companies who are doing the survey, we ask them what challenges were they facing? And really, this should come as no surprise to any of you what the challenges are. Number one is leadership. And in fact, leadership was the #1 challenge last year as well. Now, what's interesting here is when we took a deep dive into the topic, we actually realized that it's not so much that leaders aren't agile, it's that leaders don't understand agility in necessarily the same way. We do have a challenge with middle managers. We do have that frozen middle who don't want to change. And there are certainly some leaders who will actively oppose an agile transformation, partly out of fear, because they don't know if they're going to have their job, partly because of status. If I'm no longer a senior vice president of X, Y, and Z, who am I? But there are also leaders there who they want agility, but they're focusing on strategic agility, whereas they're not maybe focusing on operational agility, or the other way around, they're focusing on operational and not strategic. And so sometimes there's a disconnect between the kind of transformations that are occurring and the kind of agility that some of the leaders want. And that disconnect needs to be fixed in organizations in order for them to be successful. Change management is a key challenge. Again, any of you who are running a transformation know how hard it is to communicate the change that you're making, communicate how companies need to be different, and do so in such a way as people aren't afraid for their jobs. And in fact, one of the worst things that you can do is mix together an agile transformation and a headcount reduction, or making people redundant. Because what happens is, like, you're trying to be more agile, you're trying to be more effective, you're trying to be more productive, you're trying to create an empowered and engaged workforce, but there's this fear about, I'm going to lose my job. So everyone sort of hunkers down and they go, okay, I'm going to just do what I need to do to keep my job, right? Or worse, all your best people go put their resumes and they go find a job. So all your best people are already gone, and you're just stuck with the ones who aren't your best, because they can't find a job anywhere else. And unfortunately, your organization has some major issues. So if you're going to undertake one of these a large-scale business agility transformations, while there will be, and almost certainly will be, people who will not have roles in the new way of working, it should not be one of the key factors. It should not be about reducing cost. That should be a separate transformation done either before or done after. It should not be done at the same time, because it makes the change management even harder. Culture and mindsets. Again, if you ask any coach the challenges for organizational transformation or the challenge for agile, they will say culture. And we get it. It really is a problem, but there's no easy answer. And in fact, if you go back to those domains, one thing that you should be aware of is that you'll notice that culture was not listed anywhere. And that's because culture is everything. Every interaction between every domain is, by definition, your organizational culture. You change any one thing and you will change your culture, all right? But the current status quo, the current existing culture, has a momentum, has an inertia. It doesn't want to change. So what you need to do is actually create techniques inside your organization to snap that culture, to make sharp changes that shock it into a new state, right? Whilst making people also feel safe. And that goes back to that change management of safety and change at the same time. Some of the great quotes that came out of the report: they have a risk-averse culture which forms silos and layers of bureaucracy. I've worked with enough Indian companies to know that that's probably true for a lot of you right now. Our senior leadership lacks the understanding. All right, we struggle to properly staff the transformation. Do you have enough funds for the transformation? All right, senior management is not bought in. All right, due to a lack of alignment with their personal objectives. That's actually another key point as well. A question that I always get asked is, where do I start on an agile transformation? Now, obviously, it doesn't really matter as long as you get started. But one of the best places I usually say to look at is your organizational KPIs and your personal KPIs. If you can change those, you've actually got a really good chance of changing the entire organization. But sadly, most organizations don't change KPIs till towards the end of a transformation. They change the structure first and the processes first. But the problem is you get this butting of heads, this conflict between, like, I have a KPI that tells me to do X, but a process that tells me to do Y, and they don't come together really well. And there's a really great quote by Deming back in the 1970s. I'm paraphrasing here. Give a man a measure and he will destroy the company to make it. And it's one of my favorite quotes because it's so true. You look, if the only measure you give me is to sell more, then I will do whatever I can to sell more, including destroy the company, right? Not deliberately, but if I will make long-term bad decisions for a short-term sale, because all I'm measured on is how many sales I can get this quarter, right? And we have companies out there failing because of decisions that were made 3 years ago because of those short-term KPIs. And that's going to be a big challenge for most of the organizations around the world today. So lastly, I want to leave you with some recommendations, and then we're going to go to questions. So I hope you've been thinking and listening. Start writing your questions in the Q&A, or start writing your questions in the chat, and we'll address them over the last 10 or 15 minutes. But I want to leave you with a couple of key recommendations. All right? Number one, how you lead an organization will impact the culture of the organization. So don't fall back to traditional habits. When things get hard, and they will get hard, when the markets are tough, when you lose a major client, right? Watch how you lead. Watch your leadership style, because your leadership style in a crisis is going to shape the organization more than your leadership style when things are good, right? Change management. It's got to be something that everyone does well. That how you communicate change, and because remember, agile organization, change is everything. It's certain uncertainty is the name of this, right? What you do when there's uncertainty, you are ready to change. So change management has to be something that everyone's got to be able to do, because change is something that everyone has to be able to do, right? Focus on culture. Get the support and buy-in from the broader leadership community. Make sure there is appropriate coaching and mentoring at all levels of the organization, from the CEO down. I don't mean like an agile coach, but coaching on growth mindset, coaching on ownership and accountability. I know when I was much younger in my career, I didn't know how to take ownership of things. I just wanted to be told what to do. And suddenly when I get put in a position of authority, I have a challenge because I don't know how to take ownership. Okay? And lastly, make sure the entire organization is aligned in setting the goals. Right? Your KPIs, your OKRs, whatever you want to use, your whole company should be aligned. And that's going to be, and so, sorry, not just aligned, but involved in the setting and the creation of those goals. You want me to own something? It helps if I helped create it. So before I go to the questions, I promised discount code to the Business Agility Conference. It's in Bangalore, 18th, 19th of September. If you, I will be there, so I'm more than happy to meet up and talk about any of these topics with you. We're going to be running some health checks, organizational health checks. There's some career assessments going on, and the usual great speakers from banks and technology firms, retail firms, sharing their stories about how they've done everything that we've spoken about here today. So I'm going to pause there and open up for some questions. So let me stop sharing for a second and bring up the chat. All right.
Thank you, Evan. It was really a wonderful session.
Thank you. Moses, can I get the PPT after the session? Yes, absolutely. I will share all the slides. I will also share our latest, I'll share the report with all of the data from that. I will also share we wrote a book on the domains of business agility, and I will share the link of that book, which you can download and learn more about that, as well as the links to a number of different case studies that sort of amplify and support everything that I've spoken about. What else? Do you plan to launch any certifications? Let me answer that in two ways. The direct answer is no, we will not be launching any certifications. The longer answer is because there are already some very good certifications out there. I would have a look at the IC Agile. IC Agile has the Business Agility fundamentals certification, as well as an agile leadership certification, as well as a series of certifications on agile finance, agile marketing, and agile talent. In leadership, Scrum Alliance also has their certified agile leader, their CAL certifications, which are also pretty good. So with IC Agile and Scrum Alliance creating some really, really good agile certifications, there's no need for us to do so. We just support what they do, and we will help them to make sure that they're of high quality. A quick plug, there's going to be a number of workshops in Bangalore for business agility just after or just before the Business Agility Conference. So if you do want to get a certification, then and there's the time to do that. Sridhar, how do we align the KPIs of different departments? That's a very good question. So first of all, you need to be focusing on business outcomes. So at the end of the day, you have one customer or a common customer. Someone is buying your products or your services, right? How do they measure value? How do they measure the value that you create to them? What does success look like for them? That's a very good place to start. Right? Once you know how to measure value for your customers, then you can start to break that down internally. And then if you still have a functional silo, and many organizations, it takes some time to sort of create true cross-functional teams, but you can then look at how does marketing help to create that value for the customer? How does technology create the value for the customer? How does operations help to create value for the customer? And so the KPIs or those or OKRs, and I recommend having a look at objectives and key results if you want to see a better form of how to do organizational measures. Those naturally start to align with the customer, and they start to then align with each other. The key there is the law of unintended consequences. Whatever KPI that you design is going to have, you're going to design for one result, which will automatically design against another kind of approach. So it's possible to overemphasize one thing, such as customer satisfaction, and underemphasize, say, profitability, because you still need air, you still need to breathe, you still need to be a company, right? So there's got to be a level of what's what I'm looking for, balance in those KPIs, in what's happening, so that team A and team B don't cannibalize from each other, and that comes from transparency and communication. All right. That's also where the structural agility comes in, because the closer you bring teams together, the more you bring them into alignment, so that perhaps they're even the same team, that goes to that no handoffs concept, then you've got a situation where the KPIs naturally start to align. So structural agility interlinks with your KPIs and your measures, and you've got something that is very, very powerful. All right. But again, this is why these are multi-year journeys. All right. Getting all that interlinked together seamlessly is hard. Shweta, how does personal agility collaborate? How does personal agility Sorry, Shweta, I'm not sure what that question is trying to ask. So if you can rewrite, oh, there you go, there you go. You did rewrite it. How does business agility interlink or collaborate with personal agility? So let me answer that in two ways. Number one, how much time do you spend at work? Right? More time than you spend with your family. Right? And that is the sad truth. We spend the majority of our waking life at work. Now, what does that mean from a personal standpoint? It doesn't mean that we work too much. It means that work should be one of the greatest joys in our life. Work should give us experiences and engagement that makes us go, oh, I'm loving this. So personal agility as a way of, as an individual, being more effective and being more adaptable, having that growth mindset links into business agility because of just how you as a person link into how you work and how much you work, right? The other is true as well, because business is the biggest part of your life. It needs to be engaging and empowering and exciting. It's got to give you joy. It's got to be the kind of organization that gives you something that you can actually grow in, that you can take pride in. And if you can have both, then personal agility and business agility interlink very neatly. You can't have one without the other. No, that's not true. You can have personal agility without business agility, but not for long. Because what will happen is that you'll end up moving to another company, just bluntly, because another company will be better. Right? Likewise, if your organization is trying to empower you and create engagement, but you don't have that growth mindset, then I'm afraid that you'll probably also need to find a new company, but because you won't enjoy working there anymore. All right, so there's got to be both have to grow together, if that makes sense. More on the event next month in India. I'll share a link after this. I don't want to we don't have a lot of time, so I won't spend too much time on this. There's a link I'll share with all the speakers, with the workshops that are on, as well as everything else. Oh, someone already shared the link. Oh no, they shared the link to the domains. I'll share the link to the workshop, both in the chat and afterwards. During an unfavorable financial situation, how much is transformation a priority, considering stock prices have a disproportionate influence over decision making? I think this is going to be the last question I'm going to have time to answer, and it's going to be a hard one to answer. So I'm going to give the answer that I'm going to give you what I think should be the case, and then I'm going to give you the answer of what is the case. So what should be the case is in situations of downturn, of poor stock prices, of market uncertainty, that is exactly the time you need agility, right? Because if you think about all the big recessions, and I can't say so much for India because I don't know a lot of your business history, but in Australia and in America, the companies who are successful now are the ones who invested in being able to thrive during the recession. And so when all their competitors were going out of business and went down, they continued. They may not have gone up, but at least they were flat. And so when they came out of the recession, they were in a much, much stronger position. Now, that means two things. Number one, it means you need to be investing in business agility before the market goes down, because it takes years to create the mindsets and the culture that's necessary. So you need to start investing now so that when things do go down, you're in a very, very good place. And two, you have to keep investing in it when it's going down. So, and maybe not as much, you probably don't have as much funds to do so, but you do need to have some level of investment to maintain a level of adaptability. Think of strategic agility or an emergent strategy, one of the key domains, right? In a downturn, you need to have a really good strategy. You need to be able to adapt to a changing marketplace very fast, because the market will change faster than your competitors. So you've got to change at the speed of the market, not at the speed of your competitors. Now, so that means you've got to keep investing. Unfortunately, most organizations kill transformations during downturns, and those are also the organizations that usually don't survive the downturn because they're looking at very short-term measures rather than long-term measures. All right, so it's about investment ahead of time and so on and so forth. I know there's a lot more questions, and I know there's a lot of stuff. What I'm going to do is please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me questions, meet up with me in Bangalore when I'm there. If you can't make the conference next year, I'm almost always at Agile India in March. So also, I'm not sure yet. I'll probably be there then. Just ask me questions. This is a complex topic. There are 1,000 different moving parts to companies, but know three things. Number one, you are not alone. There are companies all over the planet doing this. Number two, right? The people on this call and the people around you are the ones who are going to help you when things get hard. And number three, right? You're not special. Well, you are special. You're all special. All right. But your company, all right? Anyone who says, oh, that won't work for us because is wrong. Because I can give you a case study or a reference in any industry, in any company size, in any domain that says, I can make this work, right? So if anyone comes and says, we can't do this, you know what? Come and ask me and I'll show you how you can. And on that, Ishan, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Evan. You almost got me glued. I just want to keep on listening to you. That was so amazing. And as Ivan said, to all the attendees, we will be having the Business Agility Conference on 18th and 19th of September. For the registration, Mihir, I think he has already posted the registration link and all the details on the chat. I would also be sharing all the session recording, the question answers which took place during this session, also the handouts and the presentation. By tomorrow, I would be sharing this with you, all the attendees. All right. And yes, thank you once again, Ivan, for having for joining us for this webinar. It was amazing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you to all the attendees for joining us today with Ivan and me. Have a great day. Bye bye.